You know, a good rule of thumb about controversies is that you shouldn't wait until the last minute to explain yourself because no one will care. And that's exactly the response people will have to Maimouna Decore's opinion piece in the Washington Post. For some reason, she waited weeks to explain what happened with her film Cuties, instead of doing it immediately when the controversy first broke out. By waiting so long, she's reacting, which really doesn't help her at all. Netflix is already getting hit with people canceling their accounts. Several congressional members have requested the Department of Justice investigate Netflix, and presumably Decore, for creating and distributing illegal materials of children. Scores of people are labeling her the worst sex offenders who ever exist. Sure, all of that was going to happen anyway because people are reactionary idiots who fall to mob mentality every time, especially when they feel self-righteous about things they don't actually care about, but you didn't need to help. So much could have been avoided if Decore did what I suggested everyone do in my last video. Think more than one step ahead. I don't know how you couldn't see this coming. You could see this coming from another galaxy. Obviously, people are going to lose their minds over it. After all, it was seeing the 11-year-old girls twerking in the competition that made Decore want to make the film. Quote, I was at a community event in Paris a few years ago when a group of young girls came on the stage dressed and dancing in a very risque way. They were only 11 years old, and their performance was shocking. Curious to understand what was happening on that platform, I spent the next year and a half interviewing more than 100 10 and 11-year-old girls across the city. The result was my movie Mignon, or Cuties in English. I wanted to make a film in the hope of starting a conversation about the sexualization of children. So why didn't you just make a documentary? You spoke to more than 100 girls, right? Why not film that and make a movie? That seems more interesting because you'd get a direct perspective from the girls, from what they think about what they're doing, to their parents' reaction, to the public's response, to how the girls are affected by what they've seen and done. That way, you get the point by simply letting the girls do what they already do. And that's really all you're trying to show. Obviously, you'll still want to take care not to make the film exploitative. You need to be careful how you film the girls on stage, although I don't think that'd be a problem since no one will let you film that close during a competition. But during the practice sessions though, you'd want to be careful. A documentary about this would have been a better way to go. Then she says, quote, the movie has certainly started a debate, though not the one I intended, which is why it's so important to think more than one step ahead. For example, if you were going to comment on the debate and mention that people are overreacting, you would anticipate their counter-arguments and build a retort into your argument. If you wanted to be a dick about it, you would do it subtly. Say by mentioning that people are jumping to conclusions about people's interest in children, and then showing what it would look like if someone applied that flawless standard in reverse, and then watch as the same people calling others geppettos get pissy when someone calls them the same thing, thereby revealing their hypocrisy and probably hitting too close to home. Decore should have considered all the potential misinterpretations people would have about the film, and had a response ready. One easy thing to have done was film a behind the scenes of the process, showing what you did and how the girls behaved. For example, if you asked the girls to dance and they danced provocatively on their own, you'd have instantly made your point about how the girls are behaving. Honestly, that alone would have been more enlightening. Another way of handling this would have been to anticipate that people would accuse you of doing the thing you're criticizing, and so have a response ready for that, namely that you want people to see what these girls are doing and how society is failing them. You would still get criticized for how you did this, because you did go too far, but at least you'd have a counter to claims against you. Then she says, quote, puberty is such a confusing time. You are still a child, with all the wonderful naivete and innocence, but your body is changing, and you're self-conscious and curious about its impact on others all at the same time. And this is a point I made online, to which all the hyper-knowledgeable parents lost their minds. The common problem is that parents tend to have blinders on when it comes to their kids. They don't have this problem with other people's kids, which you'll find out once some busybody mama decides she knows better than you. When it's someone else's kid, you can see all their flaws, both the kids and their caregivers, and you're really critical of them and very unforgiving. When it's you and your kid though, you end up with this situation where parents don't want to see their kids grow up, leading them to think that just because 11-year-olds aren't adults that they're not thinking about adult things. They are, and our job is to prepare them to deal with that, not pretend they're toddlers trapped in bigger bodies. Anyone who works with kids will tell you this because they're around enough kids to have learned this lesson. Like Decore says, quote, the stories that the girls I spoke to shared with me were remarkably similar. They saw that the sexier a woman is on Instagram or TikTok, the more likes she gets. They tried to imitate that sexuality in the belief that it would make them more popular. Spend an hour on social media and you'll see preteens, often in makeup, pouting their lips and strutting their stuff as if they're grown women. The problem, of course, is that they are not women, and they don't realize what they're doing. They construct their self-esteem based on social media likes and the number of followers they have. While you're over here pretending your middle schooler is ready to learn about the biology of their changing body but not the sexuality that comes with it, they're already getting instructions from TikTok. You don't have the luxury of pretending an 11-year-old isn't going to be curious and start asking questions. You need to anticipate their questions and have those answers ready, and make sure your kid isn't doing stupid shit for clicks and likes. You know, think more than one step ahead. This isn't a question of if, but when. When they find this content, then what? We've given everyone instant access to virtually everything, but never bothered to ask what happens when you do that. My generation, millennials, was the first to grow up with this, and look how we turned out. I'm not saying go super conservative or super liberal. I'm saying that you can no longer afford to pretend that someone going through puberty isn't discovering sex and sexuality. We no longer have that luxury. You can't live in that delusion anymore. You have to deal with the reality of the situation you helped create. And that means teaching kids what's appropriate for them to do without trying to hide it from them, because they're going to find out anyway. And like Decore said, they're going to put tons of pressure on themselves at a very young age if you don't. And one of the ways of doing this is accepting that kids are developing their understanding of sex and sexuality, and teaching them what's okay for them to explore and what isn't. I know that people don't like to hear this, but 11-year-olds have asexuality. It's just not the same as adults, and it shouldn't be thought of or treated as the same. They're just starting to think about these things and don't understand why. Our job is to help them navigate that, not to try to bury it or allow them to do stripper dances. Now, Decore goes on to explain the plot of Cuties, and then says, quote, "Some people have found certain scenes in my film uncomfortable to watch, but if one really listens to 11-year-old girls, their lives are uncomfortable." Yeah, but you don't need to be in their snatches to show that. You're so far in these girls' bodies, their babies will be light meters. She says, quote, "We, as adults, have not given children the tools to grow up healthy in our society. I wanted to open up people's eyes to what's truly happening in schools and on social media, forcing them to confront images of young girls made up, dressed up, and dancing suggestively to imitate their favorite pop icon." Right, so just do that. Make a documentary. Problem solved. I wanted adults to spend 96 minutes seeing the world through the eyes of an 11-year-old girl as she lived 24 hours a day. Yes, that's called a documentary. There's thousands of them. Not that hard to find, not that hard to do. These scenes can be hard to watch, but are no less true as a result. Yes, and it works better as a documentary, because then it's showing what the girls are actually going through, rather than what you're asking them to do, even if all you said was dance. You made this more difficult than it needed to be, and the overreactionary mob took the bait. They probably would have acted like that regardless because they're just looking for an excuse, but you didn't have to help them. Finally, Decore gets to the point I think she should have addressed the moment the controversy over the poster happened. What she did with the actresses. Quote, "Like most 11 and 12-year-old girls, our actors in the film had already seen these types of dances and more. Despite this, during filming, we were extremely mindful of their age. A trained counselor was present on set. There was no nudity except for a 1-second shot in which the main characters see the exposed breasts of an actress over 18 while watching a video of a dance routine on a grainy mobile screen. The project was even approved by the French government's child protection authorities. And voila. Why didn't you say that before? Why wait a month with all the backlash? Why not lead with this? That you had a counselor on the set, and that the French government's child protection authorities already looked into the film before it was made. All that information would stifle some of the outrage. I say some because self-righteous people will find anything to bitch about, and pesky things like what they think happened didn't actually happen won't matter to them, kind of like the girls they're pretending to care about. This should have been your response immediately. I would have gone a step further and let the parents of the actresses speak to people accusing them of abusing their kids and saying their kids should be taken away from them. Mind you, these are the same people who think that a recovered drug addict who abused her kids for years should be given a second chance to be a mom. Almost beat your child to death? You get a second chance. Let your child twerk? You're done. Priorities. And that's what really happened here. A lack of priorities. You were more concerned with getting out your message than you were with how the message would be received. It's one thing if you say something and you don't care how people will respond. It's another thing if you actually do care, but never take the time to see all the ways someone could draw the wrong conclusion, especially with something like this. I mean, did no one think there were too many close-ups of these little girls' bodies? They were grabbing their junk more times than Michael Jackson at a 97 concert. I got the point the first time. I didn't need 5 other examples, each more extreme than the last. In fact, that's actually a solid rule of filmmaking. Never do something more than 3 times, because it'll begin to look gratuitous. There should have been the initial dance the girls did, Ami teaching them the sexy dance, and then the final dance number. That should have been the only time we got more than snippets of them practicing. That way, you can build up the tension of how the girls behave when they're not dancing, showing how they're becoming more and more risque. Or, you can just make a documentary. Not now. Oh no, people will lose their shit. But back then, that's what you should have done. And it would have gotten the point across so much better. But what do I know? I'm just some guy.